Hello, and welcome back. This is the third episode of White Rose Resistance Radio and part 2 of Benito Mussolini. A spate of migraines this week has put me behind schedule on pretty much everything. Consequently, I can't even talk. Mussolini has gone from a 2-part piece to a 3-parter. So I'll have to finish this up next Friday, but we'll still going on with part 2. We left off last time around 1927 after Mussolini had come to power, but before the Second World War had started. And in this episode, we're going to be covering more of Mussolini's policies and the things that would lead up to Italy's involvement in the war. As stated in the last episode, one of Mussolini's key policy ideas was the idea of the spazio vitale, or vital space. And he believed that the key to economic growth was physically growing the size of the country and taking land away from Italy's neighbors, in particular the Balkan states and Yugoslavia. He saw the Slavs as a lesser people and Italians as ethnically superior, which sounds pretty familiar to anyone who has studied the Germans in the Second World War. He was a firm believer in the concept of social Darwinism, the idea that stronger races, and races are in quotes here, or ethnicities deserve to survive, and weaker people deserve to fail or die or be servants. Italians were superior because of the accomplishments of ancient Rome, in his mind. So-called social Darwinism is not a serious scientific theory. All humans are equally advanced. We are all modern humans, or Homo sapiens sapiens, and individual genetic variations actually improve the species by providing a larger gene pool to adapt to new environments. In a speech in 1920, Mussolini stated, and this is a direct quote, "When dealing with such a race as Slavic, inferior, and barbarian, we must not pursue the carrot but the stick policy. We should not be afraid of new victims. The Italian border should run across the Brenner Pass, Monte Nevoso, and the Dinaric Alps. I would say we can easily sacrifice 500,000 barbaric Slavs for 50,000 Italians." This was a speech in Pola on the 20th of September in 1920. So, in December of 24, the leaders of the black shirts came to Mussolini, and remember the black shirts are his thugs, basically, that go around bullying people in the streets for him, and they demanded that he put down all of the opposition or they would do it themselves. It would be at this point that Mussolini dropped all pretense of democracy and began to openly persecute any and all opposition to his rule. A year later, on Christmas Eve, 1925, he would officially change his title from President of the Council of Ministers to Head of the Government. He would still be referred to as Italy's Prime Minister by the foreign press, just kind of sane-washing it, I guess. There would be an assassination attempt on Mussolini on the 26th of April, interestingly by an Irish-born British national named Violet Gibson. She would be released in Italy without charges, largely thanks to diplomacy on the part of the British government, but she would spend the rest of her life in a mental institution in Britain. Later that same year, in October, a 15-year-old Italian boy named Antio Zamboni would attempt to assassinate Mussolini. The boy was lynched by the crowd at his attempt. There would be at least 2 further attempts on Mussolini's life in the next couple of years. After the attempt on his life by Zamboni, Mussolini would outlaw all non-fascist political parties. In 1928, parliamentary elections were abolished and replaced with a list of candidates selected by the Grand Council of Fascism. Voters could approve or reject the list, but the same council would just suggest lists until one was approved. So you didn't really get to vote. He kind of did. Anyway, to gain better control of Sicily, Mussolini appointed Cesare Mori as a perfect prefect of the city of Palermo. Mori was told to eliminate the mafia in Sicily. His methods of doing so were torture, holding women and children hostage, laying siege to whole towns. This would earn him the title of the Iron Prefect. He would end this reign of terror in 1929 when Mussolini would name him a senator and declare that he had won the war against the mafia. This would be because it was found that certain members of the Fascist Party were actually colluding with the mafia, so it was just a big cover-up. Mussolini's economic policies, other than expanding Italy's borders, included construction programs and various government initiatives. One of the first and most notorious was called the Battle for Wheat. This policy, which established several new and model towns, would divert resources away from economically viable crops into wheat production. Farmers would attempt to grow wheat on unsuitable land using modern farming techniques. The wheat harvest did increase slightly, but the prices rose and consumer demand fell. Tariffs were imposed, and the subsidies given to farmers for growing wheat would increase the national debt. Another failed policy was the battle for land, which aimed to reclaim marshlands and redistribute the land to peasant farmers. Fewer than 10,000 people would be recipients, and peasant poverty would remain high. The policy would be abandoned in 1940. Possibly the weirdest policy would be named Gold for the Fatherland, in which citizens were encouraged to donate gold jewelry to state officials in exchange for a steel wristband that had Gold for the Fatherland etched into it. This donated gold would be melted down and made into gold bars to be distributed to the national banks. The government also took over private businesses. By 1935, Mussolini had claimed that 3/4 of Italian businesses were state-run. In 1935, new edicts would force businesses and banks and private individuals to surrender all foreign-issued stock and bond holdings to the Bank of Italy. In 1936, price controls were introduced and barriers to trade with any countries except Germany would be implemented. A thing I've often heard is that Mussolini made the trains run on time, but this is not exactly true. There were some improvements to the Italian rail service, many of which were actually instituted before Mussolini took power, but only the really politically important lines saw any real improvements in timeliness. Fascism is heavily dependent on a cult of personality around the leader. And to this end, the state propaganda is used to hype up the leader and his achievements as much as possible. State money is often spent on showy projects with no real improvements for ordinary people. Mussolini, like Hitler, was quite good at this. Teachers were forced to swear an oath to support and defend the regime. Newspapers had their editors chosen by Mussolini, and only journalists with a certificate from the party could be employed. An illusion of a free press was maintained because these certificates were kept secret from the general public. Most professions were gate-kept by organizations that required membership to practice your job and were secretly run by the Fascist Party. A youth organization was created to promote fascist ideas to children and indoctrinate them into Mussolini's cult of personality. In predominantly Catholic Italy, Mussolini also courted public opinion by making peace with the Church. Since Italy's unification and its annexation of the Papal States, the government and the Pope had been at odds. Mussolini would sign an agreement with the Pope granting the Vatican City to the Church and guaranteeing the Pope's rights, thus appeasing the Catholic Church. Mussolini also swore to uphold the honor and dignity of the Pope, whatever that means. So it was just basically a publicity stunt to win over the Catholics. That was most people in the country. So, as to foreign policy, Italy was in no way prepared in Mussolini's early reign to enter another war with major European powers, and he successfully avoided conflict with the former allies of World War I, even though he was not happy with the Treaty of Versailles because Italy did not get the territory that they had wanted. But by 1929, he was contemplating a war to conquer Yugoslavia. This would lead to a treaty with Germany in 1932, creating an anti-French alliance. His plans for Yugoslavia and his plans, I can't talk, stumbling today. His plans for Yugoslavia and war with France were put on hold when he found out that the Italian military codes had been broken by the French intelligence in 1933. After Hitler rose to power and pro-fascist partisans assassinated the Austrian Chancellor Engelbert Dollfuss, I hope I pronounced that right, in 1934, Mussolini warned Hitler not to annex Austria as he saw some Austrian territories belonging to Italy. He invaded Ethiopia and would declare an Italian empire by May of 1936. Sanctions were levied against Italy following the invasion of Ethiopia by the League of Nations, and Mussolini considered these to just be the Western powers trying to keep Italy from expanding so that they could continue to control the world. He felt like England and France and they had their colonial empires, and he wanted one for Italy as well. Italian forces in Ethiopia would terrorize the population. In an effort to rout out opposition to Italian occupation, the entire adult male population of one town was executed, a step Mussolini considered the beginning of liquidating the natives to make room for Italians. So basically, he was planning Ethiopian genocide. He did not consider Ethiopia to ever have been a real nation because he believed in the inherent inferiority of Africans. The invasion of Ethiopia would cost Italy the lives of 12,000 servicemen and strain the Italian economy. The ongoing cost of occupation would take financial resources away from the planned modernization of the military, and Mussolini grossly underestimated the cost of annexing Ethiopia. It's not just the cost of invading it, but you've got to hold it once you get there. The backlash of the international community against Italy's actions in Ethiopia would drive Mussolini to reverse his stance on Germany taking over Austria and cause him to align himself with Hitler. In 1939, the so-called Pact of Steel would be signed, making Germany and Italy military allies. Italy would also provide financial support to the nationalists in the Spanish Civil War, diverting even more funds away from Italian military's planned modernization. Mussolini's firm belief in Italy's superiority and Italy's destiny to rule the Mediterranean world would lead to him being woefully unprepared for the war with England and France that was to come. He had hoped to split the former allies by improving his relations with England. He would be disappointed in this aim when the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, who is famous for his appeasement policy with Hitler, visited Rome and declared that while England wanted good relations with Italy, they would not alienate France. In April of 1939, Italy would begin its invasion of Albania when Hitler announced his intention to invade Poland. Hitler suggested that Italy should also invade Yugoslavia. Mussolini, or at least his generals, knew that they were not ready for the global conflict this would kick off. Sorry for all the stuttering today. And refrained from invading Yugoslavia. Germany's invasion of Poland would begin the Second World War, and conflict with Italy's former allies of England and France became inevitable. Mussolini was convinced of an early German victory and so decided to stick with his alliance with Germany. He ignored overtures from England and France, who wanted Italy to rejoin the Allies from the First World War. The stage was all set, and all the players had chosen sides. Almost. The Americans were reluctant to join in another world war, and while very sympathetic to England, chose only to provide support in the form of supplies and not troops, yet. There was a pro-fascist movement in the US that strongly supported Hitler's Germany. A large rally of fascists was held at Madison Square Garden in New York on the 20th of February, 1939. I will not be doing a blow-by-blow of the war, as the Second World War is covered quite well by literally hundreds of documentaries and books. If you want to look those up, there's lots of things about wartime strategy and who did well and what would have worked and all of that kind of stuff, and the grim and horrific details of the later parts of the war. I'm more interested in the effects that the fascist policies had on ordinary people. And the question you get quite a lot is, how could people let this happen? Why didn't people oppose the fascists? Well, there was opposition. A lot of the opposition was killed, but there was definitely opposition. I will be covering all of this in part 3. So I ask in the meantime that everyone be kind to one another. Like this video and subscribe if you learned something or enjoyed it. I will be back next Friday with part 3, and then we'll move on to another topic. I have a few things in the works, but the first couple of episodes after we finish with Mussolini will be a bit of a change of pace. I'm going to be talking about banned books that you should probably read, or better yet, gift to the kind of people who support banning books. I hope everyone learned something and got something out of this, and I will see you next Friday. Thank you. Need to give a shout out to today's sponsor. Today's sponsored is Leopard Corp, quietly eating our customers' faces since 1980. Be sure to check out their annual and monthly subscription plans. You can get your face eaten either in one large bite once a year or several smaller bites once a month. Sign up at www.leopardco.blorb. That's www.leopardco.blorb.